So today is quite an important day. I'm taking somebody out who has been through a really rough time. She lost her husband a number of years ago, and about 2 years ago, I think, or thereabouts, lost her son to suicide. So probably won't be doing a huge amount of filming. She's quite a shy person, but yeah, it's really sad. It's not the natural order of things for a parent to lose a child. I've got two children as well, and I lost my mum to suicide, and I could not imagine the pain of losing a child to that kind in that kind of way. It's not the natural order of things for us to take our own lives, and it's certainly not the natural order of things for children to die before their parents. So yeah, we'll see how today goes. It should be quite emotional. Gosh, just off for a quick break. It's a 2-hour drive from Devon Point to my house, and stop for a quick break. This guy's come to join me in the front. She's not a big fan of this kind of motorway sort of noise, but yeah, it's been a tough day. Yeah, so not gonna lie, there are very much days that are harder, a lot harder to do what I do than others, and yeah. So today was pretty emotional. It was quite a tough day. So there's a lot of complexity in days like today, but yeah, there's a few very important things that we need to bear in mind when it comes to grief. Because grief is very real, and grief isn't just something that you get over. And in fact, you'll never get over grief, and that's probably the most important thing. When people say, "Oh, don't worry, you'll get over it," you don't, right? You don't get over grief. You move forward with grief. Grief will always be part of you. That thing that caused you grief, that caused you to grieve, that will always be part of you. Yeah, so when it comes to dealing with grief, there's a lot of theories about it, but none of it's backed up by empirical science. There's no research into these things. So some people say, well, there's 3 C's to grief. Some people say there's 5 stages of grief. Some people say there's 7 stages of grief. But I think it really sort of depends on the grief, like what is the grief about? The work that I do, I would probably support the notion of 7 stages of grief, a little bit more. But it's not as cut as dry as that. It doesn't follow a neat progression. Right, but I'll quickly tell you what those are. But yeah, it's tough. So stage 1 is denial. Right, something's happened. Right? In my case, my mum died. Case of today, nasty accident, took her husband away, and then a number of years later, son committed suicide. Right, and this isn't a unique case, and there are lots of things like this. But first thing is obviously denial, like shock and awe, and like I cannot believe that this has happened. Like no, this isn't real. Right, and that was certainly what I felt when my mum texted me and said, I've had enough. It was like, what? No, gosh, and you're trying to like work through scenarios in your head, like, no, this can't be happening. This isn't real. So stage 2 is sort of a combination. Stage 2 and stage 3 is a combination of anger and bargaining, right? So it typically starts with bargaining for most people, right? And that's like trying to reverse the situation, like trying to make deals with God, trying to make deals with circumstance, trying to make deals, like trying to solution it out, right? And like you can't solution it out, but you go through this hours and hours and hours and hours of like just trying to work out how the solution can be undone, but it can't, right? And then you start getting like mixing that in with anger, right? Like, why is this happening? Like, why did they do this? And there's self-loathing, and there's blaming the other person, and there's blaming other people, right? And there's loads of blaming going on, and a lot of anger, right? And that's arguably the most dangerous stage, is when you're angry, right? And when you're willing to do stuff to people or individual, like institutions that you believe let you down, let the other person down, let the victim down, right? And so the the uh, bargaining and the anger are kind of, they sort of go like this in cycles, and eventually you sort of get into this anger thing. And the number one reason why anger is so dangerous is that that's very often where people get stuck. They get stuck there, and in the next phase, stage 4, which is depression, guilt, and all those things that go with it. This is where this sort of 7 stages comes into things, because in the 7 stages they talk about guilt, right? But that goes hand in hand with depression, right? So if you have managed to get through the anger stage and you're into the depression stage, then there's hope. But when you are mixing the anger and the depression and the guilt, that's when things get really dangerous, and that's where people get stuck, right? And they can get stuck there for years, right? And that's really, really difficult, because there are other people around you, right? And if you're going through this, there are other people around you, and they know, right? And for your sake, as well as for the people who are staying behind, right, you need to allow yourself to get over that. Or you need to allow yourself to get over the anger. You need to allow yourself to get over the depression and the guilt, right? There are always things that we could have done differently, right? There's an old adage of we don't know what we don't know, right? And we made the best choices and we did the best things that we did based on the knowledge that we had at the time, right? And that whole thing about hindsight is 2020, that doesn't really count for much, right? And so you have to allow yourself, after you've been through the process, to kind of get over the depression and get over the guilt. Yeah, and then the sort of collection of final stages, if you like, because these things also sort of like, they sort of, you sort of go bounce backwards and forwards between them, but ultimately it comes down to acceptance and being able to move forward, right? And I'm very carefully don't say move on. You're moving forward. If anybody wants to, get in touch with me. I'll send you a really interesting link to a TED Talk. In fact, you could probably look it up. TED Talk on moving forward with grief. And you accept eventually, once you've allowed yourself to believe that this is true, that you acknowledge there are things that could have been done differently that weren't, and you've stopped blaming yourself, the other person, the institutions, other people, then you sort of accept that this is real, right? This is life, right? And if it's a loved one that you lost, then they will always be part of you. They will always be there, right? And if it's an untimely thing like the loss of a son, or even a parent, or a friend, a close friend, a cousin, whatever it is, right? They will always be part of you. You don't move on from them. You move forward with them. They will always be there. They will always be part of your life. Their life has, as we know it, has come to an end. But that doesn't mean that your memory of them and everything that they stood for in your life and other people's lives, that comes to an end, because it doesn't, right? You move forward with that. So yeah, today was hard, right? Today was super hard. There were other things that made today hard as well, but that was more because of, anyway, yeah, there were other things, right? But you have to allow yourself. This is the most important thing that I want you to take away from this. You have to allow yourself to deal with the anger. You have to allow yourself to overcome the guilt. You have to stop blaming other people, institutions, the person who did what they did, and yourself. Right? You have to allow yourself to get over that. You have to allow yourself to get through that, and then you have to allow yourself to move forward. And move forward, if it's somebody that you really loved, move forward with the memory of them in the best possible way. I think about my mum. There were definitely things that were tough. Certainly in the sort of last few months living with my mum, things were tough. Those things are there, right? They're part of the memory. But so is the whole Sibongile thing, right? That's massively part of the memory, because she was that to me as well, right? She was my mum, and she touched so many different people's lives, and family relationships are always tough, right? Parents say things, right? Do things, right? That you look back and you're like, good. Oh, my dad, my mom, they said this to me when I was a kid, blah, blah, blah. Right. And then as a parent, you'll do the same, right? There's things where you'll go, oh, thank goodness for, little blessings. Yeah. So you got to allow yourself to move on and move forward. Definitely. So please send this on to anybody that you feel could benefit from it, right? And there's a lot of research available, right? And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence. Whilst it's not backed up by empirical science, this is backed up by many, many, many qualified and very credible psychologists, therapists, counselors, life coaches. There's cross-referenced information to the change models, 5 steps of change, the transcendental model. There's a lot of cross-referenceable stuff, and send this on to people that you think will benefit from it. Ask them to subscribe, because we'll go into these things a little bit more from time to time. Obviously, primarily, this is all about, the things that you can do to deal with depression and dark thoughts and things like that. But some people, sorry, I haven't got an image stabilized camera, but so some people would really, I think, hopefully would benefit from this. Ask them to subscribe. All right, Sky, time to move on. I'm driving. In the back. Good girl. Good girl in the back. There we go. Good girl. Good girl.